not gonna give in. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not scared around you. You can't use that shit on me. Happy and free. Powerful positivity. Say what you believe in. Try fighting uphill with me. Avoid the dangers of conformity. A lot of us with no action. Destroy this corporate thing. A lot of us with no action. Destroy this corporate thing. Rape your ancestors for the power you need. We're not gonna give in. I'm not with a mask. We're not scared around you. You can't use that on me. Happy and free. Powerful positivity. Say what you believe in. Try fighting uphill with me. Avoid the dangers of conformity. A lot of us with no action. Destroy this corporate thing. Pay your ancestors for the power you need. 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 Pay your ancestors for the power you need.
How's it going?
Good evening, everyone. It's so nice to be here with you again. I'm very excited for tonight's show because we're going to be talking about some super fun stuff and some kind of dystopian stuff. So I hope you guys are ready for this. As usual, all my links are in the description. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, share, etc. Do all that super cool stuff. Dot is depending on you, and so is Dip to a lesser extent. Dip is much more capable of fending for himself. Dot is not capable of fending for herself. She is adorable, though. She's, I want to say, 8 weeks old as of like a few days from now, and she's like this big. She's the size of a loaf of bread. She really needs you to hit like and subscribe and share with everybody you know. Very much appreciate it. For sure, we will spend all the money we earn from this channel on toys for her. She really needs some chew toys because she's been chewing on my finger nonstop. And she also really likes to chew on my feet, my slippers, my pants, my hoodie, really anything she can get a hold of except the stick that I got for her out of the backyard. She does not like that. That's very boring to her. Everything else, super awesome. So I'm going to be looking down a little bit like this while I'm reading tonight because my laptop is lower than usual. But I really want to start by talking about this super cool phenomenon that's coming for the first time in a long time. I love looking at stars. I think they're amazing. They're very cool. I used to look at them with my friend Arlene in Colorado Springs. We had a great time doing that together, and she would sometimes go up to the mountains to look at them. This year, we have a chance to see a once-in-a-lifetime green comet. This is called Comet C 2022 E3 ZTF, which is a very creative and unique name. I'm sure you will remember. This comet will be at its very brightest as it makes the closest flyby to Earth nearly 28 million miles away, so it's really close. Read on for a guide on how best to spot it, including tips on when to head outside, where to look, and any extra equipment you might want. There are some really cool images of it. I haven't looked at where exactly it's going to be most visible, but this is kind of what they expect it to look like. Now, admittedly, we haven't seen it in a really long time. Well, let's see if they saw it in this article. Green Comet live feed. Watch this cool in the sky reach its closest point to Earth. That's so neat. A distinctive green-hued comet with a visible, rare anti-tail will pass close to the Earth this week for the first time in 50,000 years. Stargazers across the planet will be looking skyward in a bid to see the comet known as, C22E3 ZTF, which was discovered last year by researchers from the Zwicky Transient Facility. I have no idea where that is, but that's awesome. If you want to check it out for yourself, while possibly visible to the naked eye, NASA suggests that onlookers will need either a telescope or binoculars to get a good look at the astronomical marvel. In the U.S., the comet will be most visible shortly before dawn, particularly on Thursday morning as it reaches its closest approach to Earth. This is so cool. Oh, wow. That's amazing. Osama Fathi captured this wonderful comet image in Egypt's White Desert on January 21st. He wrote 3 tales of the comet with a chicken and the mushroom rocks, White Desert, Egypt. That is so cool. This is probably the coolest picture that you'll ever see. And I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I find this kind of stuff fascinating. It's so funny because I don't particularly love space itself. I find it to be kind of scary and overwhelming. And the Northern Lights kind of shady. I'm not so sure about those things. They're beautiful. Don't get me wrong. But you guys should definitely investigate the whole green comet and make sure that if you can go out and take a look at it and try to invest in some good binoculars before that happens. It's going to be a lot of fun. Always worth seeing if you can find it. I think I accidentally just closed this tab that I was supposed to read first. Yeah, okay, cool. We had a few open for the green comet. That's going to be super awesome. We're also going to hit on Ron DeSantis' greatest hits from just like today because he had 3 big wins, and we're going to talk about all of them because all of them are really cool. We're going to talk about the ways the GOP is following in DeSantis' footsteps, which I view to be an exceedingly good thing. We're going to talk about oh my gosh, we're going to talk about this incredibly unsettling article and some of its implications because it's incredibly dystopian. There was an article published that the National Institute of Health was fully on board with and fully recommending. Let me see if I can find it. No, I don't have it anymore. Here we go. All right, I found an article covering it that said a bioethicist proposes using women in vegetative states as surrogates. So that sounds like a horror movie. And people kept talking about like Dune. They were talking about axolotl tanks, which I've never heard of. I have no idea what sci-fi that's from, but it really is starting to feel like we're living in a sci-fi movie. We're going to move from there on to talking about surrogacy and the gay couple that referred to their new little baby that they ripped away from its mother. In a heartless act of surrogacy as a piece of hand luggage, which is incredibly disturbing, especially upsetting after the breakup of that horrifying pedophile ring in, I want to say Georgia, with those two fathers and their two adoptive sons who were horribly abused. Really, really gross stuff. I don't like surrogacy. I will explain why. I'm not a Catholic. I don't consider myself a Christian. This gets into bigger issues than that because I think that religion is so different from science. But I wanted to point out the green comet to you guys and give you an opportunity to figure it out if it's going to be visible where you are. Let's read about earthly matters. DeSantis pushes ban on diversity programs in state colleges. Good. I feel like I'm going to be saying good a lot tonight. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis on Tuesday announced plans to block state colleges from having programs on diversity, equity, and inclusion and critical race theory in his latest step onto the front lines of the nation's culture wars. The Republican governor debuted the proposal as part of a larger, higher education legislative package that is expected to be taken up by the GOP-controlled state house when its regular sessions begin in March. I have to say that Ron DeSantis would not be anywhere near as effective as he has been if he hadn't had the backing of the GOP-controlled state house. So I think that the teamwork at the state level in Florida is just glorious. It's really exciting to see what can happen when a state has all of its ducks in a row and when all of its representatives and when it's all of its politicians are elected in the same party. So it's always kind of interesting to me to see states like Florida and recognize that if we were to divide the country into portions, like along party lines, you could have, it's actually really interesting to think about how maybe on the left coast you could have completely Democrat-controlled states. And then in the middle you could have a mix of the parties. And then on the right coast, obviously that's not going to be the case, but possible, just a thought, you could have Republican-controlled states and you could see which states did better. And then I'm sure that likely the Democratic Party controlled states would adopt a lot of the Republican-leaning policies because they tend to work better. I was going to pull up an article about how everybody's leaving California, but at this point, it's such old news. You guys just need to know that it's continuing. A lot of people are going to New York. A lot of them are going to Washington, Oregon, Ohio, Montana, Colorado, Nevada, and those states right outside of California. But they're really spreading across the entire nation, and it's kind of distressing to see. All of those people who used to vote so crappily in California are now moving to these other states. This is exactly what happened to my home state of Colorado. It turned the state bluer and bluer and bluer, so we went from purple to completely blue. Unfortunately, I'm concerned about that happening, but I'm glad that everyone who wants to leave California is being able to leave. Anyway, let's continue this. The second-term governor, who is widely expected to launch a 2024 White House bid in the late spring or early summer, has emerged as a fierce opponent of so-called woke policies on race, gender, and public health. Such positions endear him to the GOP's conservative base, but threaten to alienate independents and moderate voters in both parties who are influential in presidential politics. The AP is wrong about this. You know what the Democrats have done with parents? They have turned parents writ large, regardless of whether they're Republicans or Democrats, into a voting base. That's probably the most dangerous thing you can possibly do, because if you turn them into a voting base and you let them know that you're against them, you think they're terrorists, they're not going to vote for you. And parents are bipartisan. They cross all kinds of lines. They're rich, they're poor, they're natives, they're non-natives, they're immigrants, they're far left, they're right leaning. It's whatever. They're just parents. They all have that in common. But if their kids are in the public school systems, then the parents are concerned about what their kid is being taught in that system. That parent has now become a part of a bloc that is turned against Democrat Party principles. So I think the AP's analysis is completely lacking, but given that the AP was recently just telling us not to use the word "the" in reference to terms like the AP, I'm really disinclined to give them any credence whatsoever. They are not the brightest in the bunch. Okay, so here we go. Here's the spin. Ready for this? Critical race theory is a way of thinking about America's history through the lens of racism. Oh, that's actually fair. Scholars developed it during the 1970s and 80s in response to what they viewed as a lack of racial progress following the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. It centers on the idea that racism is systemic in the nation's institutions, which function to maintain the dominance of white people in society. Not a bad analysis on that one. I think people want to see true academics and they want to get rid of some of the political window dressing that seems to accompany all this, DeSantis said at a news conference in Bradenton, adding that critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, known as DEI, would get no funding and that will wither on the vine. Good. In the statement, the governor's office said the proposal raises the standards of learning and civil discourse of public higher education in Florida by prohibiting higher education institutions from using any funding regardless of sources to support DEI, CRT, and other discriminatory initiatives. Oh my gosh, I just keep saying good. Later in the day, the newly conservative majority on the once progressive New College of Florida Board of Trustees, most of whom DeSantis recently appointed, voted to oust the current president's Patricia Oker. They also voted to begin a debate on whether to abolish the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and related programs. Good. Oh my gosh, this is wonderful news. This is the culture war, and this is how politicians should be fighting it. At the state level, it's fantastic, and we're going to look at how the GOP is considering putting something kind of similar, a very watered-down version, into effect at the federal level. Good news all around. The overall idea is to transform the school of fewer than 1,000 students in Sarasota into what the new trustees call a classical liberal arts school. I think it's time for us to set a new standard, said one of the new trustees, conservative activist Christopher Rufo. I think new leadership is the expectation. The trustees voted to hire Richard Corcoran as the new college president. The Republican former state house speaker and education commissioner is a close ally of DeSantis. Before the meeting, dozens of students held a rally outside to oppose major changes to the school and its mission, which is known for its open approach to coursework without specific grades and being a safe place for many LGBT students who feel marginalized in other schools. That's what's at stake today and what we're here to protect. The freedom to learn, the freedom to think, and the freedom to be who we are, said fourth-year student Madison Markham. As the 2024 presidential primary season begins, ambitious Republicans are increasingly eager to lean into cultural divisions as they court the conservative voters who typically decide GOP primary contests. Then we get into former President Donald Trump. I don't care at all about that. He just mentioned something about education. DeSantis' overall higher education proposal was expected after his administration requested in late December that state colleges submit spending data and other information on programs related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and critical race theory. The governor is also pushing for education administrators to realign courses to provide historically accurate information and to not include identity politics. It's very telling that the AP is taking issue with the fact that Ron DeSantis wants historically accurate information in school courses. DeSantis' proposal has not yet been introduced as formal legislation, but the GOP-controlled state house is often eager to carry out its initiatives. Yes, because they're good, practical ideas. DeSantis and other conservatives have long argued that critical race theory and diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are racially divisive and discriminatory and are often cited in criticism of what they call woke ideology in education. Last year, the governor signed legislation dubbed the Stop Woke Act that restricts certain race-based conversations and analysis in schools and businesses. The law bars instruction that says members of one race are inherently racist or should feel guilt for past actions committed by others of the same race, among other things. This AP analysis, barring its first misstep, has been surprisingly even-handed. I'm relatively impressed with them in spite of their language advice. So let's move on to the next win for Florida. I'm actually going to hop to this one because it's more educationally oriented. This is from Hot Air, which is a source that I love. Unfortunately, they have a VIP section that you do have to pay for, but they are an interesting source of right-leaning news, and I always enjoy what they have to say. They were gone for a while. Was that them? There was another site called Heat Street that I think's gone forever, but Hot Air was just totally inert for quite a while. Very glad they're back. After DeSantis' pushback, College Board drops critical race theory from AP course. Oh boy, let's read what happened here. You've probably heard about Florida Department of Education's decision earlier this month to reject the curriculum for a proposed AP high school course in African American Studies. AP in this instance does not stand for the Associated Press as it did in the last article. It stands for Advanced Placement, which is the college preparatory classes that you may recall from high school or maybe not. It's been a while for me since I was in high school, even though it feels like it was just yesterday. Depending on who you asked, this was either entirely appropriate or a sign that Governor DeSantis wants to block the teaching of history in public schools. Here's how the decision to reject the course was first reported. I love a little context. In a January 12th letter to the College Board, the nonprofit organization that oversees AP coursework, the Florida Department of Education's Office of Articulation, said the course is inexplicably contrary to Florida law and significantly lacks educational value. While the letter did not elaborate on what the agency found objectionable in the course content, DeSantis spokesman Brian Griffin said in a statement to CNN Friday that the course leaves large ambiguous gaps that can be filled with additional ideological material, which we will not allow. As the Department of Education has previously stated, if the College Board amends the course to comply, provides a full course curriculum, and incorporates historically accurate content, then the department will reconsider the course for approval. Griffin added. The rejection of an advanced placement African American Studies course follows efforts by DeSantis to overhaul Florida's educational curriculum to limit teaching about critical race theory. In 2021, the state enacted a law that banned teaching the concept, which explores the history of systemic racism in the United States and its continued impacts. That is a very squishy way of saying that. Not long after the Florida Department of Education decision, DeSantis himself made a statement explaining why he supported it. DeSantis at his news conference emphasized that Florida requires the teaching of Black history, but the state determined this optional advanced placement course violated state law. We want to do history, and that's what our standards for Black history are. It's just cut and dried history, DeSantis said. You learn all the basics, you learn about the great figures, and I view it as American history. 100%, of course. I don't view it as a separate history. We have history in lots of different shapes and sizes. People that have participated to make the country great, people that have stood up when it wasn't easy, and they all deserve to be taught. But abolishing prisons being taught to high school kids as if that's somehow a fact? No, that's not appropriate. 100%. What part of history does saying we should abolish prisons have to do with? That makes no sense. Today, the College Board released a revised version of the curriculum with a few notable omissions. The College Board denied any suggestion that it watered down the course after Florida Governor Ron DeSantis attacked an earlier draft as progressive indoctrination, but the 234-page document now omits mention of certain left-leaning figures who appeared in a previous version. Gone, for instance, are Kimberly W. Crenshaw, a scholar and writer on civil rights and critical race theory, and from my understanding, the originator of the concept of critical race theory, and Angela Davis, a political activist and academic known for her membership in the Communist and Black Panther parties. She was a terrorist who spent years in prison for her actions on behalf of, I believe, the Black Panther parties, but yes, definitely an avowed communist. The document also listed some potentially controversial topics that students must explore through independent projects. Examples include affirmative action, reparations, Black Lives Matter, and queer life and expression in Black communities. I still fail to understand what role in Black history queer stuff plays. What's the role there? Do Black people really like queer stuff? Because I have to say, I'm pretty sure that most Black people, if you look at the demographics, are strongly Protestant Christian and have very, very strong faith orientation. I don't think they're big into queer stuff. Neither is the Hispanic community, to be fair. This is very much why they rejected the Latinx label. While the Washington Post story above opens with the College Board's denial that they reacted to Florida's criticism, the New York Times version of the story is more strident. After heavy criticism from Governor Ron DeSantis, the College Board released on Wednesday an official curriculum for its new advanced placement course in African American Studies, stripped of much of the subject matter that had angered the governor and other conservatives. In light of the politics, the College Board seemed to opt out of the politics. In its revised 234-page curriculum framework, the content on Africa, slavery, Reconstruction, and the Civil Rights Movement remains largely the same. Good, because those are things that actually happened in history. But the study of contemporary topics, including Black Lives Matter, affirmative action, queer life, and the debate over reparations, is downgraded. Subjects are no longer part of the exam and are simply offered on the list of options for a required research project. That sounds perfect. I feel like if you want to encourage kids to explore that stuff, fine. But as far as the basics go, teaching kids what actually happened because it's a history class is probably the better approach. This is so simple and so straightforward to me. It's really kind of shocking. The expunged writers and scholars include Kimberly W. Crenshaw, Roderick Ferguson, a Yale professor who has written about queer social movements. Yeah, he didn't need to be in there. And Ta-Nehisi Coates, the author who has made the case for reparations for slavery. Gone, too, is Bell Hooks, the writer who shaped discussions about race, feminism, and class. That's that intersectionality. So if you can't get enough points for being a lady, you can now get more points for being a Black lady and even more for being a Black, disabled, sexually ambiguous lady. All of these changes seem custom-made in response to Florida's criticisms, but eventually the Times does get around to the College Board's denials and actually allows them to make a plausible case that the changes were made for other reasons. Interesting. David Coleman, the head of the College Board, said in an interview that the changes were all made for pedagogical reasons, not to bow to political pressure. At the College Board, we can't look at statements of political leaders, he said. The changes, he said, came from the input of professors and long-standing AP principals. He said during the initial test of the course this school year, the board received feedback that the secondary, more theoretical sources were quite dense and that students connected more with the primary sources, which he said have always been the foundation of AP courses. Sure, okay. We experimented with a lot of things, including assigning secondary sources, and we found a lot of issues arose as we did. Sure they did, because they're not based in historical context. Talking about bell hooks in a Black history class is not where it's at. I'm sorry. And it does not surprise me that students think the same thing. Kids are surprisingly down to earth. When they look at something that doesn't make sense, they're going to be like, what is this? And why are you teaching it to me? What's the point of this? And I think that's probably exactly what happened here. We experimented with a lot of things, including assigning secondary sources. Okay, I think that's most surprising and powerful for most people is looking directly at people's experiences. That's fair, and that's true. As so often the case with media coverage of culture war/political topics, it can be difficult to discern what actually happened as opposed to what the various factors involved had decided is the most convenient and beneficial story to tell. So this is the whole history is written by the victors. This is the people who won telling us exactly what they want us to hear. And I'm very glad that Ron DeSantis is pushing back on this, 100%. Let's go down to the bottom. This is a relatively long, let's see here. Andrew Sullivan. Remember when we were all told over and over again that no one was teaching CRT in high schools? Now the newspapers are angry that the College Board is backing away from doing exactly that. And this is from Dan McLaughlin. The funniest part is where the New York Times say the College Board purged the names of many Black writers and scholars associated with critical theory from the formal curriculum. So much for CRT as just a grad school theory nobody would ever teach in public schools. The people who insist that no one would ever try to teach CRT in public schools sure are mad that the College Board is backing down on its plan to teach CRT in public schools. I love that Ron DeSantis is doing explicitly this because this is proving all of the left arguments about this to be completely disingenuous and dishonest. And I'm so glad he's showing them for what they are. But that's not all he's doing. That's just the educational side of things. Ron DeSantis has other plans too, and these are awesome. Even as Massachusetts is considering banning gas stoves, Ron DeSantis is pushing permanent ban on Florida sales tax on gas stoves. I heard he's also pushing to eliminate the tax on baby formula, which is fantastic too. Florida governor wades into debate over gas stoves, using his state budget to push for sales exemption to boost demand for the appliance. Ron DeSantis, the governor of Florida and a likely 2024 candidate for president, delivered on an earlier promise Wednesday when he said new gas stoves, in fact all gas appliances, should be exempt from his state's sales tax. He rolled out the first budget of his second term, and among the proposed breaks for taxpayers is a $7 million permanent exemption on appliances fueled by combustible gases such as natural gas, propane, butane, liquefied petroleum gas, and syngas. I don't know what syngas is. The move comes as the debate over gas stoves has heated up, in recent weeks. In an interview with Bloomberg in early January, an official from the Consumer Product Safety Commission talked about the possibility of a ban on the sale of gas stoves, which some studies have found to produce emissions that contribute to climate change, blah, 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 also posed health risks inside the home. Oh yeah, remember they clarify, except that now Massachusetts is pushing for it. The official, Richard Trumka, later tweeted, to be clear, CPSC isn't coming for anyone's gas stoves. Regulations apply to new products. For Americans who choose to switch from gas to electric, there is support available. Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which includes an $840 rebate. Oh my gosh. I do not want to read more about the IRA. Not that IRA anyway. So let's read what exactly you guys are thinking about this. I just can't help thinking that Ron DeSantis really has such a recipe for a GOP strategy for success in 2024. It's delightful. It was only discovered last year. That's why it has 2022 in the name, says Surrogacy, in connection to the comet we were talking about. That's right. It was just discovered last year, and it was just spotted early this year, apparently over Egypt. It's beautiful. They name comets like Elon. We name comets like Elon names his kids. Let's give it a fun name like Sparkles, says Brie. I love that. Sounds like the movie Coma, probably in conjunction with our gestational topic. Very interesting. Surrogacy says C basically means its orbit is more than 200 years. Interesting. So they're probably rated on scales of A, B, C, D. Fear Me It's Bree says Alex Clark has an episode of her podcast, The Spillover, on surrogacy and the dark industry it is. They even go into some of the shady parts of IVF as well, people don't usually consider. Very cool. I need to check out The Spillover. There are lots of awesome conservative ladies out there who are doing their own thing, and I could not be happier. I absolutely love that we have ladies in the conservative space who are speaking up and giving their takes on topics. I'm just one of them. I just don't happen to be connected to any company. I'm kind of just doing my own thing. So thank you all very much for joining me. I very much appreciate it. She says, been listening to a lot of research on it and looking into it, debating doing an episode on it at some point, surrogacy/IVS. You definitely should, Brie. I think that would be awesome. It's a very important topic for conservatives to consider because it's kind of just taken for granted in a way that I think is probably not in our best interest. It has some serious implications that we need to consider. So I do think an episode would be good. New College is full of weirdos, always has been. I'm not familiar with that school, but it does sound like it's kind of full of weirdos. I'm very glad they're restructuring the board there. Exactly, I'm more okay with IVF than surrogacy industry, and I know someone right now who is benefiting from and having a baby because of IVF while she struggled for a decade. It's a touchy topic. It is. IVF is different than surrogacy. Surrogacy strikes me as truly very, very close to The Handmaid's Tale in a way that's actually unconscionable. Like legit treating women as just incubators for, sperm from people who don't really want anything to do with them as human beings. This is not how the world was designed to work. Biology did not design us to have this. All right. Somebody says, hey, Control WQ. Hi. Hello. How's it going? Bringing them over, going back to them, aren't you? Cool. I don't understand what that's in reference to. College is the airlock between the safety of home and the real world. Be prepared, not sheltered. That's how it should be. I don't know if you guys remember I can't remember his name now. I think his name was Greg, but he was yelled at by a college student. I believe it might have been Greg Lukianoff, who wrote the Sheltering of the American Mind with Jonathan Haidt, I think. He was yelled at loudly. I don't think that was his name. Anyway, he was screamed at by a student who said this is not supposed to be an intellectually rigorous place. This is supposed to be a home to us. And she was just so tearful and so sure of her identity politics. And I was just like, wow, lady, you were taught the wrong stuff. Hopefully soon, why you came. I'm hoping at least 1 of 2 videos a week to start. Yes, you absolutely should. If you have a chance, you should probably start a YouTube channel. It's very, very good for thinking on your feet. When I was in high school, we did speech and debate, and that was a lot of fun. You were judged. You were literally judged on how well you could communicate your thoughts and your arguments, and I always thought it was wonderful. And going into this field was incredibly fun for me because I was like, oh my gosh, this is where the pedal hits the metal. This is where the action happens. This is where ideas come to play, and it has very real impact on the world. It's so important for us to engage with it and find ways to defend our ideas and find ways to communicate them to the people who are listening to us in the most compassionate, empathetic, direct, clear-cut, and truthful way we can. I think that's fair. I've been prepping to get my own channels going, but work has been insane for the last month. I know things often get in the way. If you can, just have conversations with people that you slightly disagree with a little bit. Like Andy and I disagree on stuff. He's more libertarian. I'm much more conservative. I feel like I'm pulling him toward conservatism, which I'm very proud of. I can't help saying. But he has a much more anarchic bent. He likes the idea of not having any government, whereas I'm just like, maybe we just need a smaller government just because it's what we've always had. And he brings up these examples of states that have lived without actual government. It's a very interesting conversation. It's the kind of conversation you should definitely have with your spouse, the kind of ongoing discussion about ideas. That's really the case of iron sharpening iron as you talk about all of these different things and keep your ideas sharp. I need to go back and work on the article that I wrote a few months ago called Why Being Conservative is Good for Your Brain, because I truly think it is. By being forced to defend our ideas on every possible platform and to all of our friends and neighbors, honestly, it's good. It keeps us sharp. I view it as a positive thing, and that ties into my larger philosophy, which is that humans are meant to struggle. And that's not a bad thing. That's exactly what we're meant to do. We rise to the occasion and we kick butt and we make things happen, and things have to be difficult. Otherwise, we never get anything done. We get stuck in this cycle of, oh my gosh, you guys, I was watching videos of these people telling us all about their quirky, weird, bizarre, stupid pronouns. And I was like, I feel like at the end of the world, when everything's falling apart and we don't have running water or indoor plumbing, all of that is going to be gone, because it will. The only reason that stuff exists is because we live in the lap of luxury and we're not constantly being challenged. This is also why we run into health problems like obesity. We run into problems like addiction, because we don't have an overarching driving force to push us towards something. And because we lack that, we're weakened. And you know what they say about weak men? Weak men make hard times. And I think that's exactly where we're at right now. The only hope about hard times is that they create strong men. And that's what we're going to be. And that's what our children are going to be. So there's a silver lining. It's not all great, but it is what it is. Hard times are going to be coming, and it's fine. It's where we're supposed to be. It should give us a great deal of peace to recognize that our kids are going to be strong people. So let's read this. This is Ron DeSantis' impact on the GOP. It's awesome. SWORK today. Okay, Southwest Arkansas today. I don't know what SWORK is. All right, press release. Tom Cotton and Jim Banks introduced legislation to cap compensation to DEI bureaucrats. This is interesting. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas, introduced legislation today to limit the amount of compensation diversity, equity, and inclusion Department of Defense employees receive. Representative Jim Banks, Indiana, 3rd District, introduced companion legislation in the House. Awesome. So we have a senator and a House. So we have both sides of the coin. This legislation would prohibit the Department of Defense from employing military or civilians above the rank of E5, which is $31,000 a year salary, in DEI-related roles. Good. The bill would also require these employees to be reassigned within 180 days of enactment. Bill text can be found here. I don't think we're going to read the actual bill. Government bureaucrats promoting divisive ideology should not earn a higher paycheck than the soldiers on the front lines defending our country. This bill will make sure the Department of Defense's budget focuses on strengthening our national security, not paying administrators to solve social justice problems that don't exist, said Cotton. Good. Good for him. Bureaucrats are getting paid more to teach anti-Americanism than patriotic service members who stand ready to fight and die for their country. It's a travesty, and it sends a dangerous message to troops and recruits about the Pentagon's priorities and values. Funding poisonous ideologies will destroy our military's readiness and cohesion. This bill ensures more of the DoD's budget is spent on warfighters who enable the U.S. military to accomplish its mission, which is to win wars, said Banks. That's wonderful. Now, I saw something recently about the British Army and the analysis delivered from the American military. I don't think... Oh, crap. Okay, I can't find it. Okay, so it was something about how, U.S. general warns British Army no longer top-level fighting force. And this is incredibly disturbing. U.S. general warns British Army no longer top-level fighting force, defense sources reveal. Rishi Sunak risks failing in his role as a wartime prime minister unless he takes urgent action given the growing security threat posed by Putin, it has been warned, with calls for a significant hike in spending. A senior U.S. general has privately told the Defense Secretary Ben Wallace the British Army is no longer regarded as a top-level fighting force. They said this decline in warfighting capability following decades of cuts to save money needs to be reversed faster than planned in the wake of Russia's war on Ukraine. Bottom line, it's an entire service unable to protect the UK and our allies for a decade. The sources said Rishi Sunak risked failing in his role as a wartime prime minister unless he took urgent action given the growing security threat posed by Vladimir Putin's Russia. So for the UK, Russia's a little bit more pressing because they are so much closer. But I did find it especially rich that the United States, which is, from my understanding, is lowering the standards for the military, for us to be pointing fingers at the UK and saying you're doing it wrong and you're weak, you should increase your spending. Meanwhile, we are, let me see if I can find an article about this. I saw something about it. So they changed it for women, I believe, in, oh gosh, yeah, great. Here's how the military, oh no, they're going to make me do the thing. Here's how the military dropped its standards in 2022 to address a major recruiting crisis. Yeah, so we have a recruiting crisis, which I have been arguing strongly is tied to the DEI people in power. When you see somebody who's telling you that white men are evil, you do realize what the predominant demographic that fights the Americans' wars is, right? It is white males of the age that you say you hate the most, which is genuinely disturbing. So it doesn't surprise me in the least that they're having recruiting issues. In 2022, amid a historic recruiting crisis, U.S. military leaders lowered the bar of physical and mental standards required to join the service. The changes, such as expanding access for individuals with a history of behavioral health concerns, could reduce military readiness, Thomas Spohr, director of the Heritage Foundation's Center for National Defense, told the Daily Caller. These changes have been part of a trend of lowered standards, mental, physical, and medical, which has taken place over the last 2 years. The military standards for committed members and new recruits have dropped in 2022 as the services struggle to overcome challenges in filling the ranks. I am honestly so glad that Tom Cotton and Jim Banks are proposing this. We'll see if this goes anywhere, but it's a very, very, very important, I think, in a way that these guys seem to understand more than actual military leaders. And that is, well, Tom Cotton was in the military, but more than the actual leaders in the military seem to understand. Because when you tell people that they're inherently evil and there's nothing they can do about it, why would they ever join your group? What's the point? And this kind of ties into my larger theory that this critical race stuff and this anti-white rhetoric is really designed to specifically undercut and weaken the West especially. Because the West is full of white people. And when you say white people are nothing but evil and embodied racism, where are you going to go from there? How are you going to get those people to fight wars for you? From my perception, I think that critical race theory is designed to go into these institutions and eat them from the inside out, which it's been shockingly effective at doing. Like, the conservatives have been exceedingly weak in pushing back culturally until very, very, very recently. And that's especially embodied in Ron DeSantis and in politicians, however weak they may be, like Tom Cotton and Jim Banks, because their hands are very much tied and they are constantly fighting political battles, so they're very much hampered. But at least they're kind of pushing in that direction. The way I see it, critical race theory has got a foot in the door in this institution of the military that I never thought it would have. Now, when I worked in the hospital, I remember looking at a sign and doing an in-service about obesity. And the main thrust of this obesity in-service was basically to say you have to be nice to people who are obese. You can't tell them that they're eating too much. That would hurt their feelings, even if they're in the hospital for diabetes or uncontrolled, all sorts of different stuff, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, all these other things that are literally hand in hand with obesity, but you're not supposed supposed to talk about that. You're supposed to be very, very nice all the time and make no mention about how their eating could be possibly literally killing them. But I kind of saw that coming because I knew that the healthcare system was run by and large by women. And we saw this the other day with Verdant Labs research about how all the different careers are oriented along the lines of politics and how strongly male or female they are, which was very interesting to see too. Women in general tend to vote exceedingly blue. This is actually something that we also saw in Scotland. I remember when they passed their crazy gender redefinition bill in Scotland, I was like, okay, so who's the party who put these people in power, who pushed this through? This bill that essentially is going to be targeting and victimizing women by putting men into women's prisons and treating men as women and making it so that women can never receive women's only care. And of course, the party that put those politicians into power was largely voted in by women. And I was like, okay, all right, fine, you deserve it. I don't even know what to tell you. Why would I fight on the behalf of people who put these people into power? Like, you're going to be targeted. It's going to be you and your mother and your daughters and your grandmothers who are in nursing homes who can't get female-only care for their most, personal needs. It's really, really kind of distressing. It's not just jails. It's nursing homes. It's gyms. It's sports. It's everything. Everywhere that a woman might need to feel like a little bit of reassurance that she's not going to be around some kind of predator. And for some reason, these people who are so heavily emotionally motivated can't seem to grasp that predators don't care about your feelings. They don't care what you're trying to accomplish or how compassionate, diverse and inclusive you're trying to be. They don't care about your equity. They care about getting into the spaces where they can take advantage of the people who are least likely to be able to resist them. So I just was so grossed out by that, but also not surprised, because I really feel like the feminine political pathology we're seeing of safety and inclusivity and diversity and equity is really containing within itself the seeds of its own destruction. Because once you start including everyone, you're going to start including people who aren't female, which I had that revelation last night, and I was like, hey, you know what? That actually doesn't sound that bad. But at the same time, I know that people who didn't vote in favor of these things are going to be drastically negatively affected too. And my heart actually really goes out to women in prisons, because you already know that they can't vote. Their hands are tied. They have no say in what happens to them. And they certainly didn't vote for any of this stuff, especially if they've been in for any length of time. And I don't really care what you've done in the form of a crime. I don't think that sexual assault is a proper punishment for any crime. I don't think that's fair. I firmly believe that violates every conceivable human right, especially for prisoners and other people who can't push back. But speaking of women's issues, let's get dystopian. We're going to look at Live Action News, which I know is a biased source, but I found the original paper about this, but it was really pretty dense and academic. So let's look at the breakdown from Live Action News. Fetal containers. Bioethicist proposes using women in vegetative states as surrogates. So I have to let that sink in, because it's incredibly unsettling, and also because my voice is a little hoarse. I'm going to take a sip of coffee here. Oh my goodness. A bioethicist has argued for using women in a persistent vegetative state, PVS, as surrogates, calling it whole body gestational donation. So my first question is, can a woman in a persistent vegetative state consent to being used as a gestational donor? And I'm about to swear, I'm sorry, forgive me. Of course, someone in a persistent vegetative state cannot consent to anything. They can't. They shouldn't be asked to. They should be taken care of. I know there's a lot of conversation. I remember when Terry Shiloh was removed from life support. I have actually also seen stories of, for example, a father who took things into his own hands when the doctors came to pull the plug on his son, who everyone assumed was brain dead because he had been in a persistent vegetative state for a very long time. He armed himself and took up occupation in his son's room. And it was a darn good thing he did, because his son ended up coming out of this coma. Whereas the doctors would have been more than willing to pull the plug on him, he made a recovery thanks to his dad, who refused to allow them to do so. but I digress. That's an entirely different, fully otherwise loaded conversation. Anna Smajdor of the University of Oslo wrote in a journal, Theoretical Medicine and Bioethics, that women who are brain dead shouldn't have their wombs going to waste when people who want children can use them. We already know that pregnancies can be successfully carried to term in brain dead women. There is no obvious medical reason why initiating such pregnancies would not be possible. But the ethics of such a decision seem to have been overlooked by Smajdor. Though women with PVS could possibly recover, Smajdor argued this kind of surrogacy should still be allowed. I suggest that, all other things being equal, it should be an option for anyone who wishes to avoid the risks and burdens of gestating a fetus in their own body. She said, adding, I suggest that brainstem dead men would also have the potential to gestate, meaning that the pool of potential donors is further increased, and that certain feminist concerns might thus be assuaged. Now, that boggled my mind a little bit, because it's like she understands that people are going to look at her and say, it's so hard for me not to swear right now. They might look at her and say, holy cow, what on earth are you doing? You are turning women into human incubators. What are you doing? Reenacting The Handmaid's Tale? Seriously, it's like The Handmaid's Tale on steroids. The donor would have to give consent ahead of time, she said, but overall, government policies, she said, should support it. States and health services should adapt their policies and procedures to allow for WBGD, among other donation options, she said. If it is viewed as a straightforward means of facilitating safer reproduction and avoiding the moral problems of surrogacy, we should be ready to embrace it as a logical and beneficial extension of activities that we already treat as being morally unproblematic. She acknowledged the process is straightforwardly the use of the body as a fetal container. But like many apologists for surrogacy, she still argued it should be allowed if the donor agrees, despite the inherently exploitative nature of surrogacy, which is what we're going to talk about next. Don't worry about that. Furthermore, in recent years, researchers have been able to restore brain function in a patient who had been in PVS for 15 years and have also found that as many as 20% of people declared PVS may actually not be PVS at all and are fully aware of what is happening around them. Though someone may have consented beforehand, there would be no way to ensure that they were still willing to have their body used as an incubator, and it only further leads to the commodification of children, with women's bodies forced to be the tools to create the products wealthy adults want. I feel like that's a great segue to this next article, which is disgusting in an entirely different way. BBC journalist in same-sex marriage hit with backlash for celebrating new hand luggage baby. Mark Lowen and Pedro Penim apparently obtained their new baby in Canada, which the former described as a shining light of democracy and equality. Thank you for letting us fulfill our dream, he said. A BBC correspondent experienced a swift backlash after he published a photo of his same-sex partner holding their surrogate's baby, whom he described as beautiful hand luggage. And this is Mark Lowen. After 6 weeks in wonderful Canada and tearful farewells to our incredible surrogate and friend, it's time to go home to Lisbon with our new family member, our most beautiful hand luggage. Period. Full stop. That's the thought. This new family member is an accessory. Canada, you are a shining light of democracy and equality. Thank you for letting us fulfill our dream. That's disgusting. I'm sorry. Anyway, one of Penim's Instagram posts describes Lowen as his husband and celebrated their 4th anniversary of their marriage. LifeSite is using quotation marks on this because, if I recall correctly, Catholics do not view the unions of homosexual people as marriages. Lowen and Penim apparently obtained their new baby in Canada, which the former described as a shining light of democracy and equality. The tweet earned Lowen plenty of criticism from people deriding their objectification of the child. A baby is not hand luggage, tweeted Live Action CEO Lila Rose. Not an accessory, not property. A child is a human being with rights. Children don't exist for the sake of an adult's dream. This baby also deserves a mom, biological or adopted. Creating her only to intentionally deprive her is morally wrong and cruel, and I cannot agree with that more. Katie Faust, founder of the children's rights organization Them Before Us, noted Lowen's phrasing and criticized him for separating the baby girl from her natural family. Especially for a girl, to have no mother in the picture is just horrifying. She was responding to a tweet in which Lowen posted a video of two siblings reuniting. The irony of a man who intentionally separated his daughter from her mother via egg donor and surrogacy sharing this tearful video of reunited twins separated from birth. You have inflicted this exact loss on your baby. She will also long for the moment for the mother you deprived her of. Jeez, no kidding. Conservative commentator Allie Beth Stuckey described surrogacy as sick and selfish, and Father Matthew Schneider said, "There are good reasons you can't do this in Portugal and had to go across the world. Surrogate parenting, rent-a-womb, is demeaning to women. I'm ashamed my home country, Canada, allows this exploitative process." Wow, yeah, there's a lot there, and I understand. I personally, as someone who's trying to grow their own family, I really understand some of the appeal of trying to look for other options when you can't conceive your own child. And I know this desire must be especially strong for gay couples, but I really have to say that I don't think it is moral or ethical to cultivate a child's life in the womb of a woman they will never learn to grow or love, or to grow with or love. I think that it's truly unfair to them. I think it's abhorrent to the natural order, because from my understanding, the best possible grouping of human beings is in the family function. I think that the family, I'm not a libertarian in that I don't think that the individual is the most important part of society. I personally think that families are the most important part of society. I think that a family is the centerpiece of culture. I think it's the most important thing that we should fight for above all else. I think it's more important than businesses. It's more important than governments. If it came down to it, I would say it is much more important than the church, although the church is certainly what gives families their structure. I think it's so important to understand that a biological mother, if at all possible, or an adoptive mother, is a very important role in a child's life. And I think that there's a reason that we exist as males and females, and there's a reason that everyone is supposed to have a mother and a father. It's because you are supposed to have the masculine influence and the feminine influence, and this is part of cultivating a balanced human being who will view others and themselves correctly. It's such an important part of society because the families create the individuals that go on then who splinter off and create their own families that make society strong. The people who understand the innately essential roles that both men and women play as they see in their own parents. Like, this is some of the most important fundamental stuff. And I know that I'm telling you this from kind of an agnostic point of view because I don't consider myself religious. I haven't since I was a very, very small child. Even then, just in passing, I wasn't really sure if I was doing it right. But I think that you can't argue, even agnostic people, even atheistic people, anyone with a head on their shoulders looking at the world as forthrightly as possible and as much in pursuit of truth as possible, is going to have to be willing to admit that you must have the family structure in some capacity. And while it's true that it's better for a child to have some parents instead of no parents, it is better for a child to have an adoptive mother and father than it is for them to have two fathers or two mothers. And the best possible option is for them to live with their biological mother and their biological father, who will view them as the product of their love and their union and the importance of their marriage to stay together for this little person and try to make sure that it works. In the bigger scheme of things, it's for this other person. And I think this might be what both femininity and masculinity are lacking in today's world. I think the fact that we've removed the servant leadership from the picture altogether is really what's leading to our decline, because it's led to young adults who are completely driftless. Like, they have no idea what they're doing with their lives. They go out and they spend exorbitant amounts of money on their pets. Like, we have a new puppy right now and we've spent a total of like $150 on her. So far, we're going to get her spayed and everything. But so far, we are like keeping it very, very cost effective because we understand, much as we love our little dog, that's not the most important thing in the world. The most important thing in the world to us right now is our marriage and strengthening one another so that then we can go on and build our family. So I think that when you give people the option to serve and help and be in community with no one, and they take that option, you're going to see exactly what we have now. You're going to see the pronouns, you're going to see the critical race theory, the constant victimhood, the constant complaints, the constant striving for some kind of utopia that doesn't exist, because utopia, it turns out, is actually having a family and building a strong marriage and being the best person you can be. And we've totally discarded that because that requires a great deal of sacrifice and a great deal of being willing to put someone else before us. And that's just not something we have anymore. And I personally blame the decline of the West on that outright. And I think that surrogacy is a large part of that. And I'm just disgusted by this article from this lady saying that we need to treat women who are in a persistent vegetative state as incubators. That's disgusting. That's just the next step as far as I'm concerned, because if we're willing to turn women into incubators for gay men, what's to say that they even need to be conscious to be able to do that? Well, there's a gay couple that wants a baby. So what's stopping them? They have a right to a baby, right? Except I don't think they do. I don't think that anybody has a right to have a child. I understand the longing. Trust me, as someone who is currently working on building their own family, I don't know if I can say this again, but I understand wanting to have your own child. I really, really do. So I get it. But if you want to have your own child, you need to understand that it has to be within that natural order. It has to be within that biological order. And the only way to have a child is to bring together male and female cells and combine them in that magical moment of conception, which is where life begins. I'll tell you that right now. There's nowhere else that it could start. And this is exactly what my anatomy professor told us when he was teaching about this. I was watching very dispassionately because I was like, I really wonder what he's going to say here, because where is he going to tell us life begins if not at conception? Of course, he was just like, yes, where life begins. There's just nowhere else in pregnancy that life would begin other than conception. But I digress on that point. But all of that to say, I think that the fact that we've removed all of the servant leadership from life is really going to put us into some truly dire and very difficult times. And I think this is the kind of dystopia that sci-fi writers are thinking of when they talk about, like, you know, kind of like the Handmaid's Tale, but also like, I forget, I think it was in Dune. I think they're called axolotl tanks, where people are kept alive just to reproduce more humans. I will also add, as like a little thumbtack on the end, that I don't think that they're going to try to push this very hard because, as we all well know, the World Economic Forum has been telling us that we are highly overpopulated, and Paul Ehrlich has been pushing the exact same lie and saying that there are too many people in the world, when in fact we have severe issues with our reproduction rates. But all right, I digress on that one. Let me see what you guys are thinking. You are more than welcome to disagree with me. I don't mind. There's a lot of nuance here, and there's plenty of room for honest discussion between people who have even very similar viewpoints on the world. All right, let's see here. Wait till they're growing them in pods with chosen features, digital surrogates. Yeah, they've been talking about growing them in like these little pod things, like little tiny plastic wombs. So strange to me. Absolutely bizarre. Every time I hear the word queer, I think some guys are going to redo someone's interior decorating. I don't think that's it. Although I guess queer eye for the straight guy is probably what you're thinking of in that instance. They're insane asylums now. Wait till it, yep. I've been doing cooking videos for the past couple months for fun. Awesome. I'm happy to hear that. When we were first starting this show, somebody was like, hey, you should do cooking. And I was like, oh gosh, maybe. I don't think that our kitchen is glamorous enough. It's like not like open wide enough to set up a camera and have everything set up and just display it perfectly. I just kind of balked from that because my cooking and baking are kind of, I just kind of do what comes naturally. When it comes to cooking, I'm very like, it's an art. Now, baking, that's a science. That is a science. But cooking is very much kind of whatever goes. You can season however you want. Using brain-dead bodies as baby incubators, it's better than killing the babies. Man, I don't know. If those babies didn't exist, wouldn't have existed, other than like the gay couple who says, I want a baby. I'm going to choose this lady. She looks all right. Sure, she's in persistent vegetative state. We're going to use her uterus for our masculine ends because we're two men who cannot create a baby. That's disgusting and abhorrent and goes in full opposition of the natural order. So I'm going to have to learn more about the natural order. It gets kind of disordered because I know I'm not religious. I think that religion would give me much more of a structure. I think I need to read more of like Saint Augustine and Bonhoeffer and a lot of those theologians, because I'm sure many of them have thought about and talked about this stuff. I need to look up some videos about this. Idiots fighting the pronoun war will not be involved in the war for survival because they just don't know how to... ... I'm not sure. Sorry, Keenan, you got to finish that thought. DOD needs to terminate the use of that program 100%. I'm going to be the opposite voice on the DOD. Soldiers should be paid while they are soldiers. They receive training to live life and be a leader of civilians. Be men, don't be babies. Yeah, but I think that in order to be a man, you can't be engaging with this DEI stuff. I think it is incompatible with masculinity. The wife gets bare minimum to survive if her husband dies in combat only. That's tough. The military is there to protect the life of the country, not the comfort. Yeah, 100%. The Forrest Gump syndrome of the military. Yep, that's how most countries dispose of males with no other skills who would drain society's welfare. There's a very, very hard truth about young men, and that is that when they are younger, they are less valuable to society than young women. And this is not a feminist lie, and I'm not saying this as a feminist. The fact of the matter is that women are, because they do have uteruses and wombs, which can bring about more human beings, means that they are more valuable. Whereas young men are just, half the puzzle. And since we haven't found a way to gestate human babies outside the human body, thank God, and I pray that it remains that way forever, women are considered more precious, and they have been. And it's especially an investment for women because it is at least 9 months out of their lives and then the concomitant 18 years to raise the child to adulthood, or some version of that, however many years, because we have such big brains that we have a very long childhood. Medicine has turned from preventative care to supportive care of obesity with drugs. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that. You should set up some debates with Andy on various topics, libertarianism versus conservatism. Possibly. That's a really good idea. That'd be a fun thing to do on Saturday mornings. Keenan says, over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. Granny, what big ears and teeth you have. Yeah, for sure. St. Miles, thank you for your super chat. Interesting show, but gotta leave early. Bye. Bye. Have a good evening. Thank you again very much for joining us. I appreciate every single one of you guys. I know we have a small audience, but I love all of you guys, and I'm very glad that you're here. Fear Me It's Bree says, also, what happened to my body, my choice? Forced birth? Yeah. Can you imagine waking up from a 5-year coma and finding out that you had like 3 kids? Yes. It's horrifying. Truly the stuff of horror movies, science fiction, really, really bad dystopian stuff. Surrogate bodies, next stage of organ donor for able bodies, may require extra checkbox on donation form for living donation. Yeah, it's very, very strange. And she even brings up the concept of like, well, if somebody changes their mind and then they're put into a persistent vegetative state, they might be forced to do something that they did not want to do. And that is an undue risk on a woman's body. Like, childbirth, gestating a child is very, very hard on the body. In fact, I was reading an article recently because I'm part of a group of new moms or moms-to-be or wannabe moms that was talking about how pregnancy pushes the human body to the limit of its capacity. And if you're in a persistent vegetative state, you're going to have a whole host of different problems. And your poor baby is going to be severely compromised from the fact that you're not able to walk or move around or do any of the stuff that a regular pregnant woman is supposed to be doing. Like, this is how we've developed. This is what humans have become, is upright walking species that carries their babies in the front of their body, low down to the ground relatively, for women. And it's in order to go through with a healthy pregnancy, you have to consider all of the factors that make somebody a healthy human being. And someone in a persistent vegetative state is just at bare minimum not going to be able to provide that for their baby. Ugh, it just gives me the heebie-jeebies. Don't like it. Child support lasts 18 years. Coma lasts 8 months. I'm not sure 9 months. Not sure what you're referring to that. Allie had a good episode on it too. Allie, Alex Clark, I'm sure there's more. Yeah, for sure. Hi, MFs, my friends. Hello, Carcass. Nice to see you. And before this baby develops a mental disorder or identifies as they, them, that's terrible. I just feel so bad. Like, if a human life doesn't exist, but people decide to play God and they decide that this little embryo should be implanted in this poor woman in a persistent vegetative state, you're literally victimizing both of them and you're stripping them of everything that makes them human. Like, did you know that babies can hear your voice before they're ever born? They hear it reverberating through your body. Like, your baby before it's born probably hears the closest version to what you hear, your own voice inside your own head, because they can hear you just like from your vocal cords down to your uterus or whatever. Very, very disturbing stuff. And it's just, I remember watching, it wasn't the Twilight Zone. There was some show that's similar to The Outer Limits. A lot of those horrifying sci-fi little like mini shows, the mini episodes were about pregnancy, because it's very disturbing to mess with that particular natural order. And I don't blame them. Like, I'm curious what they would do with this. It seems like everything they've been predicting has come true, except the aliens gestating inside of human beings. Thank goodness. I think MILF Manor is a streaming show, so the FCC isn't involved. That is crazy. Bible actually never casts Lucifer in a bad light. He is portrayed rather as a being that was sent to test Jesus. From my understanding, Lucifer was a bringer of light who was cast out of heaven into separation from God. And from my understanding of hell, that is separation from God. My parents always used to say that heaven was being close to God and hell was being separate from God, which never really resonated with me because I didn't have a firm grasp of what it would look like to be close to God. But I feel like I'm kind of starting to see it a little bit more now, because I see what the world is like with the atheists in charge, and it is not nice. All right. Or it might be broadcast. Okay. Religion is a prison. Gonna disagree with you on that one. Can be. Depends on your philosophy. I'm not religious, but not atheist either. I don't believe in the written word as nothing more than man's word in spite of what they claim. Sure. Wait, there was something here about feminism. Yes, I understand there's a lot of weak men nowadays too, but feminism seems to be the greater evil. Why do you think feminism exists? It is because of weak men. I'm sorry. It really, really is. If the family had been stronger when feminism first got a root, we would not be in the situation we are in now. All right, you guys, I had a few other things I was going to talk about today. For those, I refer you to the links in the description. There's a little segment, because I'm a genius, called In Case We Don't Have Time. And in there, you will find a link to some of the articles that I found really, really interesting, but was concerned that we might actually not have time for. And indeed, tonight, we did not have time for everything. It is now 7 and time for me to go. So I thank you all very much for joining me, listening to me rant about families and, persistent vegetative state and all that good stuff. So I will be here tomorrow at the same time. We're going to keep it really tight and short tomorrow night because we have our marriage group after the fact. Looking forward to seeing all of you guys there. And until then, bye guys. How's it going?